I'm Christine Pearson. I was a student at Rochdale College of Art in the early 60s, and I taught on the adult education evening classes in sculpture from 1967 till the early 70s. The main memory coming from secondary education was how exciting it was to use so many different materials and in so many different disciplines. O-level, we didn't even do any figure drawing. So figure composition at the college became not only new, but quite challenging. We weren't given any specific instructions as to how to form a composition. It was assumed that we would know instinctively or intuitively. I think some of us would have preferred the tuition rather than the intuition. Other areas were superb in their imparting of technical knowledge, i.e. in sculpture, a very, very good course on learning to make armatures for sculpture and going on to plaster casting, which then led ultimately, before I left as a student, into working with glass fibre and resin, which I took down to Hammersmith when I went on to the NDD course, and it was a material they'd never used down there. What occurred to me as a point of real interest was reading David Hockney's book on David Hockney, when he did mention the lack of library facilities. And it came to me that if we needed any information, a member of staff in that discipline would go to the staff room and select a suitable book pertaining to what the problem was. But we didn't have an actual library within the art college in the 60s where we could go and study. To ensure that we knew for life drawing, that we knew our anatomy, we used to take our lesson with the second year students, and we'd to sit in a circle with the skeleton on a framework in the center of the room. The tutor had cut muscles of the body out of tire inner tubes, and he had a collection of them, and he delighted in throwing us a muscle, and we had to then go into the center of the room and put it in the correct area on the skeleton. So much to the delight of the second years, us naive first yearers would often get the gluteus maximus, which is, of course, the buttock muscle, misplaced and put as the gastrocnemius on the back of the leg. So we did have some fun with that, but it was a very good grounding for life drawing and certainly for life modeling. My eureka moment in painting at the college, again, we didn't get a lot of tuition in colour work or glazing. That was obviously going to be left until we went on to a higher level of learning. I created a still life in oil paint of cogs and mechanical parts, car mechanical parts, I think they were. And the eureka moment was when I stepped back and I'd actually created form with oil paint, almost trente l'oil, where it would come off the canvas. And I'd done that on my own without any guidance from staff. Sometimes we were taught by good painters in their own right who were lecturers, and they would often make facetious remarks at the back of us, which wasn't particularly helpful, but we did put up with it. There was some sexism there in the college. Yes, we did, but it was tolerated because those are the signs of those are the times that we were in. And I suppose a lot of the girls, when comments were made about their appearance, felt rather flattered. And it was certainly before Me Too. Actually, what was one of the most impressionable things was being able to work on art for 6-7 hours a day. Whereas, of course, when it had been at school, it was just for an hour's lesson a week. So that was very refreshing. And we enjoyed the social life as well. Luckily, when I was in school on that last year, we got an exchange teacher from America, from Indiana. And she was totally inspirational, first to look at because all her clothes were coordinated. and in colour. And secondly, she was just fascinated by stone walling in England, in northern England, and she got us to actually use our eyes for the environment we lived in. And she was truly inspirational in the way she taught. She herself was also very frustrated by the 28 who didn't really want to know about the subject, but she'd inspired enough of us to go, for 3 of us to go on to the art college, then onto the intermediate course. So with that in mind, it meant a lot for me to be able to get that job in Rochdale, to be able to see whether I could put into practice what I'd hoped would happen. And that is, I would do a better job of imparting to students the skills and the techniques that I'd already learned in college myself. My husband had encouraged me to join the Rochdale Sculptors because my first child had been born in 1967 in the January, and Rochdale Sculptors were to have an exhibition on the Esplanade outside the town hall in late summer of 67. We had studio facilities at the farm, so I was able to design and produce sculpture for Rochdale Sculptors. Again, I was the only female in the group, which didn't make any difference whatsoever, except the fact when it came to wanting an eye-catching brochure for one of the years, I think it was 1970, they gave me the task of finding something I could wear that would attract people to read the contents of that brochure. And that is when I went home and discussed it with Ian, and we had a glass fibre and resin cast on the wall of a semi, from the neck, I think, down to the thigh of just a fictitious female. And we had it on the wall as a piece of sculpture. It was a tryout for glass fibre casting. And he suggested I took this, which I did for the photograph, for the catalogue, and it just clipped around my neck, and I had a skirt that came up to the waist on it, and I had a coat around my shoulders. And of course, because it was flesh-coloured paint on the brochure, it looks as though I am half naked, which served its purpose in terms of attracting people to it, but also the alderman Cyril Smith at the time, who thought it was an absolute disgrace that Christine Hampson, mother of 3, was to parade herself naked for the sake of being a member of Rochdale Sculptors. The papers covered it quite widely, as did television. And the ultimate, of course, was when it appeared in an hotel lobby on a table that a friend saw in a German photographic magazine called Stern. And it did misreport it as Christine Schmidt, mother of 6 children. But of course, people still recognised who I was when they saw it back home here. Because I'm retired now from the front line in teaching colleges, just before the lockdown, I just started teaching the University of the Third Age, a group of 15, 60 to 80-year-olds who were equally as keen as my students back in Rochdale on the evening class, I believe, but that had to come to an abrupt halt. I know that students now have got access to the most sophisticated equipment, namely audio and visual video editing studios, digital print studios and laser cutting facilities, related again, a lot of these to industry. They also have specialist technicians, a lot of them, who are degree people themselves, who help out with all these facilities. It seems to me that they've never had it so good. Looking back to those days when we didn't have a library even to get ideas, to be influenced by the art of the past, they've got not only first-rate libraries, and if you're in the major cities, you've got superb galleries and museums. There is so much out there for them to get their ideas from. And I don't even go to degree shows now, so I don't know if it actually has translated in that way. it did occur to me that the skills I was taught at Rochdale in the early days as a student and then on at Hammersmith, I can still, in my studio here, make permanent sculpture from the techniques I was taught then, working with clay, taking a plaster mold, filling it with a substantial material like jesmonite. I don't use resin anymore and glass fiber. These students of today, with all the sophisticated machinery, I would assume that they can't set their own studios up like the equipment they're used to on their training. So will they go off into a different area of creativity? Perhaps so. But I still get an absolute buzz out of using a modeling tool that I made out of boxwood when I was 16 and a lump of clay in my hand, almost going back to Stone Age with a stick and some earth color. And I just wonder sometimes whether courses now are primarily linked into the needs of industry, but hopefully fine art, painting and sculpture are alive and well. Perhaps I need to go and have a look at some degree courses and update myself on that. But art education in general does cast a wide net, or it did when everything was open. Adult education is very healthy down here, certainly. And of course, the crafts have made a resurgence since lockdown. So knitting, crocheting, collage work, all these things have come to the fore again. People have found them in work baskets in the loft, and which can only be a good thing. But I'm very grateful for that 60s training, very grateful indeed.